those that have passed and pay our respects to the victims senselessly lost by these crimes. Once again, welcome to the 13 days of Halloween, and let's jump into the video. Hello friends, welcome to video number 10 of the 13 days of Halloween. If you are just tuning in to the 13 days of Halloween, be sure to check out the 9 videos that have already been released. If you are caught up to this point, I hope that you have enjoyed each video so far. To get us started on video number 10, I am going to dive into what may be the most historical case that I have covered to date. This one was highly requested on our channel, and so I'm very excited to cover it today. Now, it did not necessarily transpire around Halloween. However, once we get into it, I think you will understand why I felt it was fitting for the 13th day of Halloween. Today we will be talking about Countess Dracula, also known as Queen of the Vampires. Castles, baths of blood, hundreds of victims, legends, myths, and perhaps the worst female murderer in human history. Welcome to the world of Elizabeth Bathory. Now, just as a side note, there are quite a few Hungarian family ruled Transylvania, Hungary, as if it were an independent principality. Such was the power that they wielded. Though Transylvania is now part of Romania, from the year 1003 to 1918, the region was actually part of historical Hungary until the Austria-Hungary alliance was destroyed in the First World War, leading to the union of Romania. Witness accounts of the time suggested that Countess Dracula may have killed up to 650 people, with the very lowest figure given as 80 victims. So, what happened to the once innocent Elizabeth that led to her killing up to 650 people? In Elizabeth's formative years, up until the age of 10 years old, she was known to have suffered from multiple seizures, which modern day research suggests would have been, like the equivalent of epilepsy. It is claimed that her parents were actually related and had given birth to Elizabeth through their inbreeding. Now, it's not necessarily uncommon for inbreeding or for incestual relations to have taken place, especially at this time in history, and it was common among humans for at least 2,000 years, predominantly in Northern Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. However, scientific research suggests that inbreeding or ancestral relationships that lead to children can cause certain, I would say, mutations in the DNA that have consequences. In the 16th century, when Elizabeth was a child, the cure for conditions like epilepsy or seizures were quite bizarre. Clearly they did not have the technological advances that we do, the pharmaceuticals that we do, or really an understanding of what, I guess, a seizure was to the extent that we do now. So the treatment or cure back then was to use the blood of a seemingly healthy person, and you would apply it to the lips of the person that was epileptic. And once the seizure ended, the sufferer or the person with the condition would be fed a mix of healthy blood and grounded up human skull. So this was a type of blood medicine used back in the 16th century. And again, all of this transpired when Elizabeth was barely 10 years old. And I don't think it's too big of a stretch to suggest that using the blood of others would have been a way to make her feel better, which is a possible reason why she became a killer down the line. And I say that because I think that this would have had a psychological impact far greater than many at the time would have realized. So I think that this is a combination of the repeated blood medicine that she was subjected to, in addition to some of the challenges that can come from when you are born from incest. Elizabeth would also be witness to severe beatings of servants, and I think for the average person this would be a very hard thing to watch. However, Elizabeth was known to laugh out loud at the punishment of servants, specifically one time in particular whose crime had been stealing. And it was said that this man's punishment was to be sewn into the body of a horse. So rather than be, mentally disturbed by this scenario, she found it to be entertaining. But this still would not be the worst thing that Elizabeth would experience in her childhood. When Elizabeth was only 10 years old, she was engaged to a member of another wealthy and aristocratic Hungarian family. A 15-year-old count named Ferenc Nadasdy. In that time period, many proposed marriages of this sort were mostly political arrangements between rich families. Now, 3 years later, Elizabeth would become pregnant by a lover of hers who was not part of the aristocratic circles, a peasant boy from the local villages. She would give birth to a baby boy and gave the child away in secrecy because this would not fly back in this time period. There would just be grave consequences to her bearing the child of a peasant boy when she is married to a count. Now, tragically, her husband, who would be 18 at the time, Count Nadasdy, found out about her love child. Even though she gave this baby away in secrecy, he tracked down the family and ordered that the baby be both castrated and torn apart by dogs, which is absolutely horrific. So, it's unclear to me if Elizabeth knew that this transpired, but my guess is she did know. And I cannot even fathom the mental toll and pain, emotional pain she would have felt, knowing that her child's life was ended in such a brutal manner. On the 8th of May in 1575, Elizabeth married Nadasdy at a ceremony said to have been host to over 4,000 guests. Now, Elizabeth's family was of a higher social standing at the time, and so she refused to change her last name. So her husband would take the name of Batory. Given the time of life and her upbringing, Elizabeth had been sexually active since the age of 10 and was known to have taken secret lovers in her family's castle when Nadasdy was away. Nadasdy was a soldier and an ambitious wanted that, so he was often away on war campaigns and other military actions. So she really spent a lot of time to herself and was able to take up different lovers. The young married couple would split their time between Castle Sarvar and the Castle of Chete, with the Castle Chete now being located in modern-day Slovakia. Elizabeth was trained on how to run the estate and really oversee everything in her husband's absence. So she was pretty smart and a self-sufficient young woman. The castle of Chete that they lived in was actually one of Elizabeth's wedding gifts, and this was set against the Carpathian Mountains. Now, this gift that she was given was inclusive of a large country house with the castle and 17 local villages, which some think proved vital to her getting away with so many murders. In 1578, when Elizabeth was 18 years old, her husband, Nadaushti, who was then around 21, 22 at the time, led the Hungarian troops into war and would continue to fight against the Ottoman Empire up until his death in 1604. And so this meant that Elizabeth was left mostly alone to run his business affairs and the estates of both their families. As was common for Elizabeth, after Nadaushti left for war, she took on many different lovers, mostly from the villages, to satisfy her intense sexual desires. She did have at least 4 children with Nadaushti, although some claim they were illegitimate offspring. However, regardless of the question of these children's legitimacy, they were welcomed by the family and they were looked after by the same governess who had looked after Elizabeth when she was growing up. Now, as mentioned earlier, Nadaushti would die in 1604 when he was fighting the Ottoman Empire. He had suffered severe damage to his legs in the war that he could not recover from. Meanwhile, though, Elizabeth had already been killing people, but it wasn't until Nadaushti's death that the murders and stories of torture escalated rapidly. So now we are in the 17th century, and early in the 17th century, rumors began to circulate around the villages, again, which was now present-day Slovakia. Many peasant girls would go looking for work in the Chete castle where Elizabeth lived. But oddly, when these girls would go looking for work, they would vanish and disappear. But nobody knew why. But before long, many locals began to point their fingers at Countess Elizabeth. The whispers around the villages were being spread more and more about the untoward happenings at the castle of Chete. Again, these girls would go missing, and Elizabeth would hire new servants on such a regular basis. That was alarming to people. Unfortunately, in the 16th and 17th centuries, peasants were technically seen as disposable and their lives expendable, so it wasn't necessarily uncommon for them to go missing. But it started to happen so frequently that it was hard to ignore. But any questions that were brought to Elizabeth's attention about these missing servants were dispelled easily enough on account of her wealth and familial position. A position that would allow her to torture and kill without consequence. Shortly after Nadaushti's death, and due to the rumors that had been circulating, a Lutheran minister named Istvan Magyari suggested that Elizabeth had been committing atrocities, but it would take another 6 years for them to be taken seriously. In 1610, King Matthias II assigned the Palatine of Hungary, which was basically an official feudal investigator, to investigate the stories that were coming out of Elizabeth's domain. What this investigator would hear while building his case would horrify him and others until the end of their days. At first, Elizabeth was accused of killing her servants, but later of killing young girls who had been sent to her castle by unsuspecting family members to learn good manners or to work. It was suggested to the investigator that Elizabeth believed drinking the blood of young girls would preserve her own youthfulness and looks. Witnesses inside the castle said that Elizabeth would use scissors to stab and bite their breasts, faces, hands, and legs. She would stick hot needles into their lips, under their fingernails, and burn them with hot metal items such as coins and keys. Other girls she would beat with clubs and let them starve to death. Other tortures included pouring ice water over the naked bodies and leaving them in the courtyard to freeze to death. She would cover some in honey to be eaten by ants and insects, along with sewing their lips together and biting off chunks of flesh from their faces. One of her more popular tortures was to use her beloved scissors to slice open the skin between her victims' fingers. But as the witness accounts went on, the stories became more unreal and absurd, if that's even possible. Some witnesses accused Elizabeth of cannibalism and blood drinking, while others claimed they had seen her have sex with the devil himself. She was accused of Satanism, witchcraft, and practicing black magic. And it is also said that she would bathe in the blood of her victims. Now, by 1611, about a year after the king had ordered this investigator to look into Countess Elizabeth, he had recorded over 300 witness statements of varying degrees from servants, villagers, and people known to Elizabeth. He would accuse her of killing or being associated with the death of approximately 80 girls. said that Elizabeth had a diary which detailed the names of her victims. It was said that this book, which is now conveniently lost to time, listed the names of 650 victims. One of Elizabeth's more trusted servants who worked in the care of her children would later be convicted of witchcraft and burned alive at the stake. The Budapest City Archives in Hungary, which holds records of the accusations against Elizabeth, shows that most of the victims were between the ages of 10 to 14. The archived witness statements claimed that the dead were buried in graveyards around the castle and villages, almost all in unmarked graves. There were even suggestions that some of the dead had been buried in the castle itself or burned to ashes. Now, because the Batory name held so much weight in Hungary at the time, it was believed that a trial and execution would have caused a public scandal. Elizabeth's adult children and other influential families claimed that the entire hierarchy would be disgraced if she were to be executed for her crimes. So the initial plan was to make Elizabeth disappear and embed her with a nunnery in the north of the countries. But the rumors of murderous nobility had completely taken hold of Hungary, and rebellion was in the air. So it was decided that Elizabeth should be placed under house arrest, basically, for the rest of her life. There is a perpetuating legend that Elizabeth was locked into a single windowless room until her death in 1614, but it has recently been suggested that she was allowed free movement within the walls of the castle. So technically this is more castle arrest than house arrest, given how large the place was and the freedoms she pretty much still had. So there is one side to Elizabeth's story and legend that is not often talked about, and that is that Elizabeth was no more than a pawn in a game of power to gain a foothold in the Carpathians, and more importantly, the strategic position of the castle of Chete. Before Elizabeth's family and other families intervened, the king wished her executed because it meant that he could seize her land and the castle. But again, they were able to talk them out of her being executed and banished her to this life of castle or house arrest. Research shows that many witnesses' accounts were based solely on hearsay, in that they had no first-hand evidence of the tortures and deaths ever taking place. Most servants confessed only under torture by the Hungarian kingdom, and there exists no documentation prior to the investigators' arrival that anyone had complained about Elizabeth at all, which would have been unusual for the time period, according to research. Now, upon the death of her husband, Nadalsty, Elizabeth was basically the heiress to a very strategically important plot images alone worth an extraordinary amount of wealth. It is said that her wealth and stronghold may have scared the king, and he sought to discredit her life before claiming it for himself. And it is said that this would have been the only way to do it without enraging the powerful, wealthy families in his kingdom. There is also a suggestion that Nadalshdi had been in a huge amount of debt and that Elizabeth refused to sell any of her wealth to settle it, so the kingdom sought other ways to be rid of her. So the story of Countess Elizabeth, or Countess Dracula, is embedded into popular culture, mystery stories, and true crime tales. But the question remains, was Elizabeth the torturous, blood-bathing murderess she has always been made out to be? Or just someone who was in the way of an ambitious kingdom? Legend has it that the blood of her victims is ingrained into the walls of the castle Chete itself, which can be visited today. Elizabeth was ultimately buried at her family's crypt, and when the crypt was opened in 1995, though, Elizabeth's body was nowhere to be seen. If all the stories about her are true, and that she killed up to 650 girls and women, then she is likely the most prolific and vicious female serial killer of all time. So that concludes our case of Countess Dracula Elizabeth Bathory. I am curious, do you think that she really was a cruel and barbaric killer? Or was she in fact merely a victim of a conspiracy that was politically motivated due to her extensive wealth and ownership of large lands in Hungary? This story honestly gives me very much Game of Thrones vibes. I'm a tremendous fan of that show and have been watching the new show House of Dragons religiously every Sunday night, and there are so many similarities to me in the storylines of the Game of Thrones shows with what transpired in Elizabeth's world. And I suppose that makes sense because Game of Thrones, clearly if you've watched it, has very significant historical ties. So I just find it super interesting. And with that said, knowing how deeply rooted manipulation and cruelty could go within royal families or noble families, I honestly wouldn't necessarily be surprised if Elizabeth was not as horrific as she was made out to be, and if these rumors were created because of political means. To be honest, that would not surprise me. That is not to say that some of these things couldn't be true about her, but it would not surprise me if she wasn't a good person and maybe did kill some people or harmed young girls and tortured them, but maybe the story is embellished. Now, on the flip side of that, I can also see how this could be true, and that it wouldn't be a conspiracy, and she really just was a horrific woman, and found this kind of pleasure in vampire tendencies and really was just a prolific serial killer. I truly can see both sides of it, so let me know what you think, if you think she truly was the Countess Dracula, or if you're more leaning towards the fact that she was a woman wrongfully accused. Thank you for